This is episode 5 of Essential Practice, and Essential Practice for me consists essentially of playing along with recordings. Many of you may be at different stages in your development, certainly those that are beginners, juniors, intermediate. You'll have to work on a lot of things that are very fundamental, like technical material, having to learn tunes, study the theory, and that sort of thing. My practice regimen, of course, has evolved over the years, and now all I really do is practice with recordings, whatever I'm listening to. I just play along with it. And that, for me, is critical. The funny thing is I don't do any scales, arpeggios, technical studies, long tones. I don't do any of that. I sort of incorporate it into my listening patterns. And one thing I would encourage all of you, regardless of what level you're at, is to spend some time making this part of your practice, playing along with a recording based on what you can hear, because this will cultivate your ear and your musical intuition and your ability to sort of interact with whatever is going on. So these are vital qualities in any good musician, and even though they're difficult when you start, believe you me, when I started playing with records, it was pretty awful. I could hardly do anything. But with time, you get better at it, and start with something simple or relatively easy. It's probably important to zero in on something you like the sound of. But for example, trying to learn by playing along with Charlie Parker or Bud Powell, that may be a little too much to ask initially. So pick something a little easier, like say Chet Baker. All right. I've picked about 3 tunes today that we'll have a look at, and they're all by Canadians. We've got a lot of really talented Canadian musicians in this country, and maybe I should just get going. The first one is by Taylor Abrams, who's a very fine vocalist. He's actually a voiceover artist as well. And he runs a studio. I should turn my fan off just because it might be a little noisy. Okay. He also has a studio that I think is right around the corner from me. I've never recorded or played there. I actually don't know Taylor personally. It's too bad because he's obviously a very sweet guy. And this is a tune from his new album, and I think it may be his first one. He's been around a while, but he's quite young. I don't think he's out of his 20s yet. And this has got a nice sort of vibe to it. I'll have to look up the title here because I don't really know this stuff very well. I sort of listen to it and forget about it. I have to pick things for the occasion. What's it called? Heaven in Your Eyes. So what I'm going to do is just, as I might when I'm practicing, play along with this track. And we'll see what happens here. How are we doing here for pitch? I think that's probably enough. Okay, let's try this. It's a tune entitled Heaven in Your Eyes by Taylor Abrams. So there we go with the first tune there by Taylor Abrams, entitled "Heaven in Your Eyes." Now I might make a few comments about this. The first thing is that I played way too much, and rather than strictly mimicking what was going on, I was actually extemporizing a fair amount. And if I were actually in the studio dressing that track, I'd be playing a lot less. But I'm just sort of having fun, as I try to do when I'm practicing. It's got a nice vibe to it, and it's not too complicated. I think it was in B flat, and then it seemed to go to another key there, F or A flat or something. It's a good idea to try and be able to identify key areas, but not to be too sort of fixated or concerned about that, because if you can find some consonant tones or just color tones and approximate, you can produce a reasonably good effect without knowing what you're doing. And I certainly didn't know what I was doing. I had a question before this episode. Someone was inquiring about playing live with gear. Maybe I'll address that. And she was indicating that she was having. I think that should be an issue. If you have a good instrument, in my own case, I use an Isomax 2 condenser clip-on mic that's made by Countryman and Associates in California. They make very good equipment. So it's a very high quality mic, and I've coupled that with a Galian Kruger 200 MV amp, which is no longer manufactured. But it's a small sort of vocal amp. And with that, I basically can function in any circumstance, and nothing ever gets too loud, at least for me, and I hope I'm not too loud, quite frankly. But the other question she was asking is about register. And I'm gonna say something about the flute register. This is very much my opinion, but it's a function of years of experience, and I think it might apply to other instruments as well, but certainly the flute. Let's just take a hard look at this instrument. It's high-pitched, and that can get very, very tedious and actually quite annoying. And the temptation is, especially when you get excited, to be launching into the third register, or maybe in the interest of sort of thinking that you're maintaining interest by harping up there. Well, it's a very unpleasant region of the instrument, and it presents problems, controlling it, keeping the pitch down, because you should bear down on the instrument to try and keep it from getting sharp, which is where it's inclined to be. And it's a bit of work, and as I say, from a listener standpoint, there comes a point when he's not going to want to hear much of that anymore. And you're in piccolo territory. So if you're going to play that high, maybe you should just play the piccolo. But what I tend to do is I really just utilize the first 2.5 octaves or so of the instrument, because it's more squarely within the range of the flute. It's a little less work. You're not at the high frequency sonorities that can be annoying. So what happens is it's somewhat less work for you as a player, and the listener is much more drawn in because you're playing the flute, and it's much warmer and more welcoming than harping consistently in the third register. Now, I can play in the third register, or I can play in the fourth if I have to, with good control, but I choose not to do that. I actually tend to gravitate towards the lower end of the instrument. This includes things like bop heads. I don't play them in the second or third register. I try and move them down as low on the instrument as I can get. That might make it softer, but as I say, from a listener's standpoint, it's much more, oh, that's kind of groovy, because it's not what a flute player would ordinarily do by instinct. I was going to say, So when I do strike for the third register, usually it's got more, it's for dramatic effect, and it's going to have more impact because you're not doing it as often. And if you have good control, then it is pleasing. Now that's not to say that the third register isn't meaningful or useful. There are certain idioms where it really does come into play. I mean, in Cuban situations, charanga, or some Brazilian choro type things, often the third register it's part of the idiom, it's part of the form, as it were. That's fine. Cubans and Brazilians are really good at it. As for us gringos, you better get the sound under control and be prepared. The other thing I might just add is I gravitated to this tendency over time and rather intuitively, but when you think about it, it makes sense because, for example, some of the famous reed players, like, just name a few, John Coltrane, Lester Young, Ben Webster, Coleman Hawkins, those are all tenor players, Cannonball Adderley, Charlie Parker. What's interesting is the saxophone only has a practical range of roughly 2.5 octaves, but you would never sense that limitation, as it were, in those players. And furthermore, they never used altissimo. They stayed squarely within the range of the horn. So what that tells you also as a flute player, although you have 3+ octaves available to you, you don't have to use them. You've got plenty of sonic scope within that first 2.5 registers, where you can make a lot of good music. So I encourage you to give that some thought. And as I say, it's very much the way I tend to play. That last track, I used probably a little more third register. I got excited there than I might ordinarily. But anyway, that will address the issue of what I do, my live setup, which I usually have a good instrument, a really good microphone, that Isomax 2 made by Countryman and Associates, and a good amp. It's portable, but it works very well. And never any issues live. And as for volume, I usually can penetrate. And strangely enough, even though I could play high and loud, I quite deliberately and conscientiously tend to move things down on the instrument. Okay, maybe we should just move on to the next track. And the next track is a little bit different. First of all, it's a female vocalist, and she is really, really excellent. Her name is BARBRA LICA, and she has done a very nice tune that's a little more folkish in orientation, and it's something that she wrote entitled "Hello from My Basement." This was actually done something less than a year ago, but earlier in COVID times, and it's hard to believe we're still here, but here we are in lockdown. So this tune has some immediate relevance as well. Very, very nice tune. Lika, Hello from My Basement. I'm thinking I might not play the entire thing because towards the end there's, well, we'll see. You'll see what I mean. But let me call it up here and see how we're doing. Oh, I've just got some questions. Let me see. No, really just comments. And I'll just quickly in passing, I'll say hi to Tim Tanashiro, my buddy from out west. Somebody was talking about a different kind of sound system. And then finally, they were saying, sounds like I was using a G minor blues on the tune. On this last tune, I was actually, when I was using a blues scale, it would be the tonic blues scale, which is B flat. But it was largely major pentatonic because it's a happy, airy, light tune. So I was actually doing a lot of major stuff rather than minor. And there was an alto saxophone player who was playing some shouts and a little bit of improvising on the end, and I sort of moved into blues territory because that's sort of where she was coming, and a little more dominant. Okay, back to BARBRA LICA. So let's see if I can call up her tune. Whoops. And her tune is Hello from My Basement. And here we go. Let's see what happens. It does. Let's see what happens. A little bit of gratuitous stuff on the end there, and we just heard the front end of the next track, which I'll get to in due course. All right, so I wasn't entirely happy with that performance. I was the form of the tune is actually probably very, very simple, and I wasn't necessarily making the 5 and the 4 chords as neatly as I might have. But so be it. I'll live with myself. But a very, very nice tune by BARBRA LICA. I decided to play through the whole thing. There's a lot of vocals at the end there, chatting, people that called her up about being locked down. And so she sort of vamped as the various parties, some of whom I know. I wasn't amongst them. But anyhow, a very, very nice tune by a very talented vocalist, BARBRA LICA. That was quite major in orientation too. Let me see if it's worth maybe I'll just play a little bit and see if I can do a somewhat better job. I'll just drop in the tune somewhere, maybe halfway through. And when I'm doing that, maybe I'll think of things to say to you, unless you have some questions. I'll just drop in sort of in the track somewhere and see if I can improve my performance a little bit. Here we go. I'm not sure that's necessarily getting any better at all. But maybe I can say a few things about the way I'm approaching it. What's interesting is it's a pretty relaxed tune, which means that I avoid stuff that's terribly intricate. For example, you don't bop over something like this because it would be sort of out of place and rude. And it doesn't pay to out-hip a situation like this. So the idea is to play a little simpler, but there are certain things that are interesting. Like even though it's relaxed, I'm still trying to nuance the air column. So and there's a lot of staccato, strangely enough, a lot of those figures. And I view them sort of like filigrees. Because people tend to, in a slow tune like that, then play a lot of legato. But, you know, if you got a little bit of sparkle to the line. So there's a few things that I'll mention there about what I'm doing. So, for example, if the note is short, it's really short. No lingering breath in the air column. It's just one little hit. Any kind of ornamentation has to be very precise. You want it to be sloppy. It has to be very precise, very even, very accurate, and also very fast. They have to be precise and fast. Otherwise, they're not necessarily going to work. Like, it's not happening. So, that's got a whole different vibe to it. Another aspect of the embellishments is that they don't get the same weight as the line itself. You don't want an embellishment to encroach on the melody. It's a decoration. So that also suggests you're really pulling back on the air column, so you can actually hear what the line is. So you notice I just try to play a line and then embellish it, and you notice how much I'm pulling back on the air to make sure it doesn't interfere with the melody itself. So those are some curiosities about the approach to that particular tune. And just in summary, what did I mention there? First of all, don't out-hit the situation. Lots of fast lines or alternate changes or substitutions or bebop-oriented things. It's not going to work there. Just don't do that. And it's rude, quite frankly. So don't out-hip your situations where they're simple. Try and make the most of them and find the groove and blend with the singer or the rhythm section or whatever is going on, whatever you happen to try to imitate or play along with. The fact that your lines can be sparkly if there's some staccato elements, and that implies when you're using short notes that they be really short, so there's absolutely no doubt in the listener's mind about the brevity of the note. And then you can decorate with embellishments, but you have to do so in a way that is very precise and accurate and fast, so that things are very clear, like the basic notes that you're trying to play are very clear and apparent. And indeed, I think this is, people talk about the jazz language and sort of knowing what to do, and often they're thinking in terms of scales and harmonies and chords. Part of the jazz language, too, is just being able to enunciate clearly, and that's part of any language. So, for example, if you're sloppy in your technique, and even if you play fast or what have you, it's not going to connect with the listener, because he's going to be struggling to try and understand what you're saying. So developing good technique, that's a D major scale, lightning fast, and you can hear every note. And that's the kind of clarity you want, because when you speak clearly, the listener is can hear what you're trying to say. It's not garbled. Yeah, I mean, that's the basic principle, is you want to speak with a clear voice. Let's see if I've got any questions here. I'm just going to double check, folks. Bear with me for a second. Comments. Maybe I should address this. Oh yes, somebody was asking about articulation. This is a big topic, and I might have to save this, pardon me, for another occasion. But I might cover a couple of the principles of articulation that do not involve the tongue. Strange enough, because when you're articulating, you often think in terms of tonguing. Well, the first principle of articulation, and I ground it on the objective of you want the sound to appear without any kind of hit or bump at the front end. You just want the sound to appear in space. So the first principle that I adhere to in articulating is essentially don't. And it's that simple. Do not articulate. And strangely enough, you don't have to articulate nearly as much as you might think. So that's the first principle of articulation, is don't. The second thing that will help you a lot is, it has to do with the instrument itself and how you relate to it physically. If your technique is very even and precise, the notes will start to pop out of the instrument. Okay? It's a strange sort of acoustical or physics type phenomenon. So if you listen to it, it's so clean that it almost sounds a little like it's being articulated, and it's not. Anyway, this tune is by ROBI BOTOS, and it's entitled Smedley. It's sort of challenging, so I hope I can actually play it again. Here we go. Okay, I'll skip past the drum solo. Just play the head out, I guess. Where is it here? Okay. What happened? I guess it's on loop. So, yeah, that's a bit of a challenge, and it's very dense, so it's hard to find your place in that situation with Robbie running amok. And he's sort of trying to capture the flavor of what he's doing. That tune is actually based on rhythm changes. I got rhythm. And I might add that the bass player is Attila Darbus, but Robbie has his brother Frank on drums in that track. And it's very boppy and kind of edgy, hinting at some modal stuff along the way. I might just say that rhythm changes they present challenges often to people, but they're not that hard in many ways. I mean, if we stand back and look at the tune a little bit, it's an A-A-B-A type structure. And the bridge is actually quite straightforward insofar as it's just a series of dominant 7 chords. D dominant 7 to G dominant 7 to C dominant 7 to F dominant 7, and then back to the tonic and B flat. So in a sense, it's just a 3, 6, 2, 5, but they're all dominant chords. And you get 2 bars apiece on them, so they're not moving so fast. So there's 1/4 of the tune that is not necessarily that problematic. The A sections, the changes are moving around rather quickly, but it's largely B flat. So there's no reason to panic or get too exercised about it. It's in the key of B flat. To come to a good understanding of the tune, especially the A sections, it might be an idea to just get something like iReal Pro and play the bass notes first, just the bass notes, for a couple of choruses, and then go back and play triads on each chord, just the bottom end of the chord. Just say triads, and then go back and maybe try and play 7th chords. Now, because the changes are moving, you might have to start in different spots, but just try and pick fragments of the 7th chord on each 2 beats. And then what you can do is, after you spend a few choruses doing that, then start to try and play the scales that correspond to each of the chords. What's the mode? And it's going to be largely B flat. But you can analyze it and just play scale. You probably have to play fragments because the changes are moving, but just try and play nothing but scale tones. So you're not playing roots anymore, you're not playing triads, you're not playing sevenths, just literally a scalar type movement through the changes in bits and pieces at a manageable tempo. And once you've done all of that, then you can start to tackle the tune. And you'll probably find that your synapses have got a much better sense of the changes, and you can produce better results. It's better than just putting the track on and blathering. Approach it systematically in that manner, for example, and then you've got a striking chance. And you'll find that rhythm changes are not necessarily that mysterious. Not necessarily. They take a little bit of work, and I know the pain that you go through when you first encounter them. But try that approach, and I think that may be enough for today, just because it's been a difficult day. And I apologize for the slow start, and also the fact that my browser shut down, and I've had to use a couple of browsers in a valiant attempt to keep my Essential Practice 3 Episode 5 up and running. So I really appreciate the indulgence. Oh, I might say, I was trying to play with Robbie there. I'll just say, I often like to work in, like trade 4s or 8s, and also to do counterpoint, where you're basically playing sort of together and off of each other. And you can't do this with just any musician. He's got to be really good, like Robbie. So, where is that album? I've got one. This is actually a really good album that I did with Robbie, and it's entitled Mercy. And that's, I don't know if you can see that very well, but Mercy is the title track. The rest of it's a lot of standards and bebop. What's on it? Willow Wheat for Me, Erigen, Gentle Rain, Yardbird Suite, Moments Notice by John Coltrane, Groovin' High. So there's a mix of stuff, but Mercy is the title track. It's something that Robbie wrote. It's very, very beautiful. But and also counterpoint, dovetailing, and it really works well because Robbie is so great. And I might just, I've written a book. For those of you who don't know, and maybe I should just mention that on the way out the door here. This is actually very good. I'm very happy with it. It's been very successful. But it's called the Technique and Theory of Improvisation, Practical Guide for Flutists, of course, doublers, and other instrumentalists, because a lot of the principles in here are sort of generic. And the book is sold really well, and I've had excellent reviews, and I'm actually very, very happy with the result. And I didn't expect the book to be so successful, quite frankly. But I think that's it. Pardon the shameless self-promotion at the end here. But thanks very much for listening. And that's it for now.